You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I'm recording this on June the 8th. That is the 1-year anniversary of CHOP. A year. That's weird. A lot of stuff's happened in a year, huh? Had the whole pandemic, crazy real estate market, CHOP, end of CHOP, homeless sweeps, you name it. We've had it going on. Just some craziness. But a year went by. That was super quick. That's weird. All right. What are we talking about today? And thank you for being here after a year. I've had a lot of email from people saying, hey, remember back a year ago? Yeah, I do. I was there. Pretty fun times. Not fun for the people who didn't make it out of that, but, covering that was something else. What are we talking about today? Along the same lines of how things ended up not so good at CHOP, gun violence, something we cover pretty often here in the Seattle Real Estate Podcast because we've got escalating gun violence going on throughout the United States. What are some of the solutions? Well, somebody from Vermont sent me this storyline. And I thought it was a pretty good one. So that's what we're gonna check out today. In a desperate response to rising crime, a Georgia town mandated that all heads of households keep a firearm in their homes for protection. However, no one expected the drastic results the ordinance would have on the city. That's what we're checking out. Talking about a city back in 1982 who said, we're going to mandate that everybody have a gun. We're going to find out. How did that go? Some of the stats say, hey, it was a rousing success. Other stats say, hey, wait a minute. Let's take a look here at the overall picture. There's some data here. There's some data there. That's what we're going to get into. Before we do, if you're new here, my name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies and I read the news. Hopefully news that you want to hear. All right. So this is the main article that my fine friend in Vermont sent to me. And that's what we're going to start with. All right. In 1982, the Kennesaw City Council passed an ordinance requiring every head of household to possess a functioning firearms at their homes. This is the Daily Wire reports. The Georgia suburb consisted of around 5,000 people. So 5,000 people in 1982, each of whom would now live within feet of a deadly weapon. Within a year of the mandate, civilians and politicians alike were stunned by the outcome. All right, so each of whom would now live within feet of a deadly weapon. It makes it sound like everybody had to have a gun. Not exactly true, right? Okay, so if you are a felon, that's a no-go. If you can't afford a gun, that's a no-go. People who don't want to have a gun, religious reasons, that's a no-go. So there was a lot of exceptions. And was it ever enforced? Was this law ever enforced? No, it wasn't. It was more of a, hey, we'd like to see everybody in our town be armed. And we're going to find out why. It was in response to some other things going on in Illinois at the time. And this was kind of more of we're going to take a hard stance. We believe people should own guns. And we believe people should be able to own guns. Whereas if you got, other people are like, guns kill lots of people. No, people kill people. Guns are just the mechanism, right? As the gun control debate rages on, many individuals have taken hard stances against the average citizen's right to keep and bear arms. Unquestionably, asserting that rampant firearm ownership will only exacerbate gun crime. The argument tends to revolve around which restrictions should be placed on our Second Amendment rights. However, the results in Kennesaw debunk much of what we've been told regarding firearms. Well, do they? That's the question. So we are led to believe that we're going to see something that has never been, it hasn't been shared that often. And here is why. 1 year after the ordinance was enacted, burglaries plummeted a staggering 89%, even though the state only saw a 10.4% decrease in the same category. Florida State University professor Gary Kleck recorded, and at the same time, the nation saw a 9.6% decline, providing evidence that the mandate was effective. You know how stats, you can basically get anything you want out of stats. If you are really looking for something, you just basically line up stuff and you're like, over there, look at that over there. Don't look at this. Don't poke holes in our theory. So here's the guts of it. Finally, the deterrent effect of civilian gun ownership is supported by the experience of Kennesaw, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta with a 1980 population of 5,095, small town, right? To demonstrate their disapproval of a ban of handgun ownership passed in Morton Grove, Illinois, the Kennesaw City Council passed a city ordinance requiring heads of households to keep at least one firearm in their homes. Do you have a gun on the premises? You do not? I'm going to have to give you a ticket. No, that never happened. It just didn't happen. This is more of a statement, if you will. In the 7 months following passage of the ordinance, March 15, 1982 to October 31st, 1982, there were only 5 reported residential burglaries compared to 45 in the same period in the previous year, an 89% decrease. This drop was far in excess of the modest 10.4% that we talked about, okay? And a 9.6% decrease for the United States. So that's kind of the broad strokes of, all right, we mandated that everybody have a gun and saw a lot of violence go down. I think, there probably was some pretty temporary, if everybody has a gun here, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we need to reimagine and rethink our criming. Maybe we should just go anywhere but Kennesaw, right? I think that had more to do with it than the fact that people actually had guns, because we don't even really know how many of these citizens of Kennesaw actually went out and bought a firearm. That data is not available. The effects in Kennesaw aren't an anomaly. Kleck discovered that rape dropped a whopping 89% in Orlando after the Orlando Police Department trained around 2,500 women in the proper use of firearms. The initiative came in response to skyrocketing sexual assaults. Once again, bolstering the causative effect, Kleck recorded that the rape rate remained constant in the rest of the Florida and the United States. Okay. Those to me are kind of two different circumstances here. Let's focus on the Kennesaw. However, arming the women in Orlando had other unforeseen effects as well. Not only did sexual assaults drastically decline, but other crimes dropped as well, including a substantial drop in burglaries. Kleck's studies point to the often overlooked reality that citizen ownership of firearms prevents crime on a massive scale. That's what this article is, propagating. Hey, this is what we got. While gun control advocates repeatedly cite the statistics associated with gun crime, they completely ignore the number of crimes that are prevented thanks to private ownership. Here's my stance on guns. If you want to own a gun, I think you should be able to. That's kind of my thing. Just don't shoot somebody that, it isn't just cause, right? Somebody breaking into your house, all right, you still might get arrested because that's kind of just how things have gone in this day and age. I believe in, I don't really believe in handguns, but if you want to have a handgun, I think that's fine. Handguns are mainly used for killing people. Because have you ever tried to shoot a deer with a handgun? Very tricky. Try to shoot a squirrel with a handgun. Very tricky. A rabbit? Name any animal that moves. Hard to shoot with a handgun. People, not as hard because you're up close and you're dealing in a confrontation manner and you just blast them, because that's what we're doing here in Seattle. I can't tell you how many gun crimes we've had lately. I mean, just literally straight up people walking up murdering each other. That's going on the daily here in Seattle. And it's certainly happening in Portland, across the United States, violent gun crime way up. In Florida, I'm going to be reading a podcast on that. On Florida, they're trying to get their gun prevention crime unit back together. They're trying to get the band back together because gun violence is so bad in Portland, but they're having a hard time getting all the people lined up for the committees that they need to have. Just kind of a mess, right? Plus, nobody really wants to be on that unit because they've defunded the police and morale in Portland Police Department, all-time low. So according to the Foundation for Economic Education, guns prevent an estimated 2.5 million crimes per year, which comes to 6,849 crimes each day. Now, that is hard to prove because you're just basically saying, well, they've prevented them. Okay, really? I'm not trying to be a non-advocate of what this article is saying. I'm just saying, as a reasonable person, does that seem reasonable? And my first thought is, no, that seems a little excessive, but I do believe guns do prevent crimes at times. If you've got somebody that's staring back out at you from their front door with a gun in their hand, you're probably going to think twice about continuing on with your criming ways at that house, right? And if you think there's a large portion of people in a town that are armed, even if you don't really believe it, I think initially you're going to go over to the town next door to Kennesaw and go, yeah, I'm going to do my thing here, not so much over there. Doesn't that seem like a reasonable approach, at least until you find out, okay, there's been some criming that's gone on. Those guys didn't get killed by citizens with newly owned firearms. All right, I think we've got a 2 thumbs up. I think we've got the green light to go back to our criming ways. I think that's that's more of a reasonable approach. But let's keep going here. In the vast majority of cases, the gun is never discharged, resulting in a non-violent de-escalation of the attempted crimes in most encounters. The study concludes that an estimated 400,000 lives are saved by firearms. You never really hear that statistic, do you? You don't. All you hear is, oh, guns kill people. We should outlaw guns. Oh, and then you've got the far right doing all kinds of crazy stuff. You should take your gun to bed with you at night. I mean, it's your friend. I'm not much of a far right enthusiast, and I'm even less of a far left enthusiast. You know what I mean? But guns always seems to play a huge part in it, doesn't it? So we got criming going on. Additionally, 60% of convicted felons admitted that they would purposely avoid targeting a victim they knew was armed. If I'm a convicted felon, I'm probably only 6 out of 10. That means you got 4 out of 10 that are like, yeah, I'm still going to target a victim even if I know they have a gun. That 60% seems a little low to me, but if you're a convicted felon, you're going to probably roll the dice a little bit more than an unconvicted felon, right? I mean, 40% confessed that they wouldn't commit crimes even if they suspected their intended victims might be carrying a firearm. Likewise, criminals confirmed that they avoid breaking into the homes of armed residents for fear of being shot. That's a good call. That is a very good call. Have you guys ever seen the Bill Burr bit where he talks about why owning a 22 is just the perfect gun, and he makes fun of people talking about their big 44? You've got just a little tiny gun with a 22. If you don't know guns, that's all right. 22 is a much smaller caliber round. I don't know a lot about guns either. The guns I do have, I have a Benelli shotgun. I've got a Remington 30-06. Most all of these guns are in storage. I'm not a very good far right guy, right? I think I have the 30-06 at home, but no ammo. I mean, what kind of gun owner am I? I suck. I've got some 22s. I've got maybe 3 or 4 other shotguns. I used to do a bunch of hunting, duck, geese, elk. Never shot an elk. So that's my gun experience, just basically a bunch of rifles and a lot of BB guns. I have a lot of BB guns and pellet guns because they are fun. You can spend all day shooting a pellet gun and still feel good about yourself, right? Okay. So although dissidents point out that no handguns, by the way, no handguns, not because I don't want one, but because I've just never really had a need to think this would be a really good idea. And having young kids in the house growing up, it always seemed like a terrible idea. And then with one of my kids having some troubles, late adolescence, it's probably a good idea we didn't have a gun because somebody would have the gun would have either been pawned or, somebody somewhere would have gotten shot with my gun. And so not having a handgun is actually kind of served me pretty well as far as that goes. Plus, I'm blind at night, and that's when most of this stuff happens because of the whole contact thing. Contacts in my eyes, not touching people. Although dissidents point out that the fact that some criminals might be armed themselves, less than 1% of firearms are used to commit crimes. Is that true? 1% of firearms are used to commit crimes? Because the way I see it is that you can't controlling guns doesn't do anything to deter crime. Because criminals, whether they're a convicted felon or not, if they want to get a hold of a gun, they're going to get a hold of a gun. That's the bottom line. Trying to take a bunch of guns off the streets, Good luck with that. If you really need one, you're going to go get one. And guess what? You are not going to go up to Walmart and get a gun. You're going to ask somebody who's got some hot gun that's got the serial numbers sanded off, or maybe it's one of these ghost guns where you have all these parts. You just assemble your own, 9mm and off you go on your criming way. And there's no way to trace that gun. So that's a lot of what I hear kind of coming up as, all right, this is what's going on. But the whole argument of trying to take guns off the street, I don't think so. Because the people who want to have a gun to commit a crime, they're going to get one any which way. That's kind of how I see it. And trying to convince me otherwise, I'm like, really? I don't think so. Because let's take a look at who is actually shooting each other. Who's doing all the shooting here? That's what you need to focus on. Where are all the gun statistics coming from? Look at those communities. And that's where you need to focus your efforts, right? Still, the chances are better for the victim if they are equally armed when encountering a dangerous criminal. So we're talking about having a gun versus not having a gun. Countless studies of private firearm ownership have proven the life-saving effects of a well-armed population. Time and time again, the evidence shows that individuals are less likely to be victimized when they are in control of their own personal safety. And yet, what I think about is people getting shot with their own gun when I read this. Again, I'm not trying to deter anybody from having a gun. I think you should be able to have a gun. If you want to have a gun, it's in the Constitution. Let's let her rip. Guns for everybody. The sad reality is everybody that wants them. And I think a lot of people just don't want them. I've thought, should I bring those guns into my house? I don't even have any ammo for them. Why do I even have them? That's a good question. If you're no longer hunting, but I think a few of the guns I keep out of sentimental value because the guy I used to hunt with was my father-in-law and he passed away from cancer. And so I just keep the guns because I think of him when I see him. And that's kind of about it. He gave me one of them and then we hunted with, a bunch of the others. And so that's why I seem to have a bunch of guns around. The sad reality is that most Americans don't stand much of a chance if faced with a dangerous criminal intent on harming them. For many women, disadvantaged minorities, disabled persons, and elderly individuals, a firearm is the great equalizer, providing them with the equity required to protect themselves. Now we're talking about equity here. I don't know. If you're a woman, just because you have a handgun doesn't mean you've got equity. And just because if you're a man, you've got a handgun, you've got equity. You got to be trained in how to use these things. These are not play toys. I mean, they kill people, right? Disadvantaged minorities. All right. You still got to be trained. Disabled people, you got to be trained. And elderly individuals, okay, you still got to be trained. So, firearm is the great equalizer. Okay. Yeah, maybe. But man, I just don't like the idea of having to take a gun out and shoot somebody else to equalize the scenario. I'd rather hide behind my locked door and hope the cops come. Although this is Seattle and who knows how that would go, but yeah, I'd probably take my odds there. As the debate over guns continues in Washington, now I'm reading a CNN article because why wouldn't I read, from CNN, trusted source. As the debate over guns continues in Washington and communities across the country, there's at least one place where owning a gun is technically required by law. In Kennesaw, Georgia, local law says that every head of household residing in the city limits is required to maintain a firearm. If you're going to commit a crime in Kennesaw and you're the criminal, are you going to take a chance that the homeowner is a law-abiding citizen? Asked Kennesaw Mayor Derek Easterling. Yeah, I think there is some of that. And I think that in that initial statistics, I think that's what you're seeing. I think you're seeing the criminals going, oh, well, we're just going to wait this one out for a little bit and just see how this goes. Because I don't really like the idea of meeting up with somebody on the other side of the door or window of this home that is packing heat. You know what I mean? I think that is definitely, if everybody knows, oh, the town, you're supposed to have a gun. Do you want to roll those dice on, well, this guy might not have a gun. Oh, he does? Whew, not a good call. We went, whatever the odds are, 1 out of 5,000, we hit the wrong jackpot. So Wayne Arnold is one of those citizens. Among the weapons he keeps at home are an AR-15 style 22 or 223 caliber rifle, a variety of handguns, and more. Because you need a variety. You need a 22, you need a 9mm, maybe a high capacity 9mm. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but these are terms that I know are important. So more or less, it's a political statement is what is going on with this town. It may be the law in Kennesaw to own a gun, but the police department says it isn't actually enforced. Many locals CNN spoke to assumed that the law dated back to the town's founding, but it was actually only enacted in 1982. It was meant to be kind of a crime deterrent, said Lieutenant Craig Graydon, who's been with the Kennesaw Police Department for over 30 years. It was also more or less a political statement because the city of Morton Grove, Illinois, passed a city ordinance banning handguns from their city limits. Back then, the town had a population of just a few thousand. Over 3 decades later, the law is still on the books. Today, Kennesaw, a town of about 33,000 people, that is a growing town. That's got some growth pains right there. Since 82, that's a big town. Town of about 33,000 people has had 1 murder in the last 6 years and a violent crime rate of below 2%. Is that due to this law being on the books that is not enforced? But it's unclear whether that has anything to do with the gun law. All right. City officials say their relationship with the community is a key factor in maintaining public safety. This is what I think is paramount, is the city officials, police officers, people in charge. Do they have a good relationship with the people that are either experiencing or not experiencing gun violence, which is their citizenship? Do they have a good relationship? If they don't have a good relationship, guess what? There is no reason why it's not going to be just target practice. And we see that down in Portland, right? We see that on the daily. It's like, no, there's no relationship there. There's not even the gun violence reduction team. There's nobody in charge. And how's that working out? Not good. But the argument there can also be made that violent gun crime has gone up throughout the United States, and it's because of COVID. People have lost their jobs. They're depressed. They can't go out. They're stuck at home. They're frustrated. They don't know what to do. Gun violence ensues. They take it out on each other. I think a lot of that can be attributed to that. People are trying to say, hey, it's because we defunded the police. Yeah, there's some of that as well. Because if you, in the back of your head, you're about to shoot somebody and you're thinking, should I really do this? F it. There's no cops that are going to come investigate me. I think that has got to play into the mindset that goes on with somebody who's about to commit a crime. All right, those other 10 guys, they committed crimes that I know of. Nothing really happened to them. This is fair game. We can't say that just gun law contributes X number of percentage to why we have a low crime rate. It may be part of it, but it needs to be looked at from a whole picture, said Graydon. Don't just look at the ordinance. All right, I'm listening. So as communities across the country re-examine their own relationships with guns in the wake of recent mass shootings, officials say that they have been getting calls from all over the country, and even as far away as Norway, inquiring about the town's gun law. We get a lot of calls, conversation, and it seems to keep crime control, gun safety, things like that on the minds of many of the residents because people are constantly talking about the gun law, said Lieutenant Graydon. So that's been somewhat of a benefit to us. So this is always at the top of, I think of minds within that community. And that is probably more of a deterrent than the actual number of guns in that town, right? Because we don't know how many people went out and bought guns in 1982. Did anybody? 5,000 people? That's a small town. You probably had a bunch of people who already had guns. If people were getting ticketed for not having guns, then, maybe you'd have some more people going out. But this was more of a kind of a statement, wasn't it? A political statement. Hey, we believe in guns enough where we're going to put an ordinance on the books. We're not going to enforce it, but We think everybody should have a gun. Every household should have a gun. And then some of these stats, they do kind of look like, all right, but wait until we get a little further down the road here, okay? The first thing that most people say when they meet us, talking about somebody in the community talking here, the first thing that most people say when they meet us, as a community is, oh, it's not what I expected, said Mayor Easterling. I don't know what they expect of people who arm themselves with guns at home or what they're looking for, but really, we're not that. So you have this image in your head of guys just walking around with like an AK or AR, whatever, and, just packing some heat, right? Maybe they got maybe they've got one of those double gun holsters like Steven Crowder wears on his podcast. Should I start doing? No, I'm not going to do it. It's ridiculous looking. It really is. But it sends the statement, right? See, that guy's got a leather gun holster, a double leather gun holster, but he's sitting in a chair. So that he doesn't have any holsters on his back, right? Because that would be really uncomfortable. But it looks like he's packing heat. So people are like, watch out for that Steven Crowder. He might shoot you. You don't know. So, the bottom line here is that there are not people walking around the streets of this town that are just, I'm just walking around with my 22, just seeing what's going on down Main Street, No, they're not doing that. You're talking about people having the mandate that they should have a gun if they're head of household within a small town, not really being enforced, right? But then what impact does it have? It's probably got a mental impact on, that guy could have a gun at home. He's not carrying one down Main Street, but he could have one at home. Am I going to mess with him? Nah, I'm going to go to the town over. So people kind of get the image that it's the Wild West where everybody walks around with a firearm strapped to their side. That's what I want to see. I just want to see an entire town with that in 2021. I mean, that would be entertaining to me. Just see a bunch of people walking around with guns. Probably wouldn't end up well, but I'd go there just to walk around. So people get the idea that it's the Wild West where everybody walks around with a firearm strapped to their side. It's not like that. There's a lot of communities in Eastern Washington and in Eastern Oregon where it is like that, where they do walk around. Most of the time they've got concealed permits. Women carry them in their purse, little 22. I mean, why wouldn't you? Because you're 45 minutes outside of any police being able to help you. You got to help yourself. That's why you probably have a firearm in a lot of those instances. That's why reasonable people would have a firearm. Let's put it that way. The other people who are sanding off the serial numbers, not so reasonable, and they're the ones committing the crimes. So it's strictly a home defense system type of deal. There's no shootouts down the street. Okay, but there were at CHOP. Weren't there? And ongoing, there's shootouts, aren't there? Yeah. So some people doing the shooting, other people not doing the shooting. All right. So here we've got the mandatory gun ownership in Kennesaw, Georgia. Snopes. We are doing a Snopes investigation. And if you don't know Snopes, I mean, I think it's a mostly accurate-ish. They try and debunk a lot of theories, right? They try and debunk a lot of conspiracy theories and just stuff like that. So here's their take. Did a mandatory gun ownership in law in Kennesaw, Georgia cause the town's crime rate to plummet? ? That's the big question, right? In 1982, the Kennesaw City Council unanimously passed a law requiring heads of household to own at least one firearm with ammunition. You can't just have a gun with no ammo. Now, I am guilty of that. Because I don't see a need to have live rounds of ammo if I'm not going to be shooting my gun. I just want to have it because it's kind of like, it's like that scrapbook you have of stuff you never really look at, but you think it's important and you should keep it. It's kind of where I'm at. In fact, it caused people all over the country said there would be shootings in the street and violence in homes. In fact, it caused the crime rate in the city to plunge. Kennesaw believes guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens make us safer. All right, so here's the actual ordinance from Kennesaw City Council law, whatever it is. Section 34-21. Heads of households to maintain firearms in order to provide for the emergency management of the city and further in order provide for and protect the safety, security, and general welfare of the city and its inhabitants, every head of household residing in the city limits is required to maintain a firearm together with ammunition thereof. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. I don't know. Does that make any sense? I mean, I admire the city council for going down this direction, because the other direction, it seems to me, is just doesn't make any sense. And that's what we got going on here in Seattle. You got a bunch of lunatics who don't know what they're doing. Oh, let's do this. I mean, that's what I talk about all the time. And by lunatics, I mean people who are completely unreasonable, who don't know what they're talking about, who are running a good city into the ground. Okay. So should we have guns? I think if you want to have a gun and you can have a gun, meaning you're not a convicted felon, do I think convicted felons should have guns? I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not. You get convicted for a felony type crime, I think you pretty much give away your rights to a gun. I know that's not a popular opinion with a lot of people. I think Tim Pool disagrees with that, but yeah, I don't really care. And I don't have strong gun thoughts other than, yeah, they're really loud when they go off, right? And they have kickback. And some kickback in big guns. In other words, Kennesaw residents were required to own guns, save for those Kennesaw residents who couldn't afford guns, couldn't use guns, couldn't legally own guns, or simply didn't want to have guns. That's a lot of people right there. Essentially, Kennesaw residents were never actually required to own guns, making most assertions about mandatory gun ownership and crime rates in that town highly problematic. All right, so there's the rub. It's not like every household had a gun. Not correct. So that's just period, right? That law was a direct response to the 1981 Morton Grove deal. Kennesaw's law was largely symbolic and was never intended to be enforced. As Kennesaw Police Department's Lieutenant Greg Graydon explained, gun ownership wasn't truly compulsory in Kennesaw, nor was it ever really intended to be. Kennesaw's 1982 gun mandate was a direct response. So here's what he says. It was not meant to be an enforceable law. The police department has never searched homes to make sure you had a gun. It was meant more or less as a political statement to support citizens' Second Amendment rights to own firearms. Homeowners in Kennesaw who don't buy a gun are not punished. In fact, there are several exemptions, including religious objections, if someone is a convicted felon, if you have a mental illness, or you simply can't afford a weapon, or if you just don't want to have one. So I'm going to say that's a large portion of the citizens in a small town, and the people who really thought it is important to have a gun, they probably already had one, right? So did any of the gun demographics really change? We don't know, because we don't really have the statistics to kind of back that up. Mayor Stevenson says that in the 5 years since the gun ordinance was adopted, the city has never prosecuted anyone for refusing to keep a gun. Officials concede that the ordinance is, for all intents, unenforceable. We're not interested in searching people's houses, said the mayor. Mostly what we want to do is make a statement. All right, we read about that. So hard statistics for the crime rate in a small Georgia city before 1982 were difficult to come by in 2015, more than 3 decades later. But the author of a March 18, 1982 New York Times editorial titled "The Guns of Kennesaw" squeezed those numbers from initially reticent Mayor Darvin Purdy and Chief of Police Robert Rubel. The jovial officials turn more reticent when talk turns to crime statistics in their community of 7,000. So 5 years later, you got 7,000. Chief Rubel says overall crime in 1981 was up 16% from 1980. But you have to ask to find out the details. Armed robberies did soar. Here's the kicker. From 1 in 1980 to 4 in 1981. So they just didn't have much crime to begin with, right? Of armed robbery. Homicides declined from 2 in 1980 to none in 1981. So they have so little crime in this town relative to a big metropolitan area that these statistics can get skewed pretty easily, right? I'm not much of a stat guy. I'm an okay stat guy, mean, median, and mode. I can figure those things out. You got an outlier there. You've got a mean. You've got, within 3 of whatever those things are, the odds are, statistical, whatever. You see where I'm going with this? Not great at stats, but I understand that you can use stats to skew things if you really want to. So soon afterwards, the narrative claiming a reduction in crime had begun to develop, even as Mayor Stevenson conceded he had no idea how many residents newly became gun owners because of the law. They just didn't really do a gun census, and nobody knows. In 1981, the year before the ordinance was adopted, Kennesaw recorded 55 house burglaries. The next year, there were 26. And in 1985, only 11. All right, but let's go with those stats. You go from 55 house burglaries down to 11? I don't know. That's something, right? I mean, you can't, and it's definitely in the downward trend because it went from 55 to 26. So it basically got cut in half over a couple of years, right? Because of this. Maybe you can make that argument. Maybe you can say, yeah, hey, you need to load every man, woman, and child who's able to be, well, children can't be head of households. That's not a good call. Plus, giving guns to children. I will never win Father of the Year, but I can comfortably say that guns in the hands of children is probably not a good idea, right? I mean, we all agree on that. As the news excerpt referenced above indicated, a drop in homicides owing to a mandatory gun ownership law would be difficult to measure, as the number of murders that took place in Kennesaw the year prior to the gun's implementation was 0 and therefore could drop no lower. It was already 0. So anything's going, from there is going to either be the same or go up, right? And the increased number of armed robberies from 1 to 4 represented a sample so low that a subsequent reduction in crime couldn't provide any meaningful data from which a conclusion could be drawn. All right. Elsewhere, another aspect to consider is whether Kennesaw's crime rates were observed elsewhere in the state. In the decade bracketing the law's passage, 1976 through 1986, there was a significant drop in murders, burglaries, property crimes, the property crime rate, and burglary rate in Georgia as a whole. They all dropped, despite Kennesaw's outlier status with the gun law in question. Statewide, the murder rate similarly dropped in a fairly dramatic fashion after 1982 without a statewide law requiring gun ownership. All right, so even though this town put this law on the books, overall in the state, murder rate dropped a lot in Georgia. So you've got some different things going on, but I think, the bottom line is people want to point to this and say, hey, if we arm every head of household, what would happen? I think initially, yeah, you might have some of these crime statistics go down. But then you got a lot more guns out in the hands of, and people do break-ins, they steal guns. That is so often one of the crimes that you see, right? Stolen firearms. Because people steal them because they have great value. They have intrinsic value because they can be used on another crime. So you steal them in a crime and then go use them for another crime, or you sell them, whatever it is that you do that makes you not a reasonable person and a criminal. So can we categorically say that mandatory gun ownership in Kennesaw, Georgia resulted in reduced crime statistics? Kinda. That's how's that for wishy-washy? Maybe. That's what we're saying, right? When you kind of look at all this stuff, you're like, you can say whatever you want to say. Yeah, I believe that crime went down in Kennesaw because every head of household had the right to a gun, and criminals didn't want to test out that theory for a while. But at the same time, you've got statewide statistics going down. Be interesting to see something like that happen in 2021, right? How about we enact this law in Portland? What would happen there? How would that go? And if we enforced it, I mean, let's go out on the ridiculous here, because this is a reasonable talk show, reasonable podcast. Let's be unreasonable and let's enforce it. Hey, you're going to get fined if you don't get yourself a gun. Don't care what it is. You need to get yourself a gun. Oh, I got to get a gun? Oh. No, let's not go down that road because that's just ridiculous. And this isn't a ridiculous podcast. We do have some type of, mental thought capacities that we try and deal with here. But so I think the whole deal here is you've got some statistics. People want to run with those stats. You can run with them however you want. But if I was a criminal, here's my thought process. If I was a criminal, would I try breaking into a house in a town that is known for having guns? I'm probably a hard pass. I'm going to go to any other town and probably do that. So as a result, I think they probably did have some crime, that didn't happen because of the widely known knowledge that, hey, people in this town have a right to have guns. They probably do have guns. And I don't really want to test out the theory by breaking into their home. I don't want to find out. I'm going to go somewhere where my odds are a little bit better in my favor. So that's what I think happened there. Can we prove that with statistics? No, because we don't have all the numbers to be able to have this make sense. And does it inherently make sense? When I first think about it, I'm like, yeah, that actually kind of does make sense. That does make sense. But everybody's got to kind of be on the same team, right? All right, y'all going to get a gun? Yeah, we are. All right. Then there's everybody's on board. Everybody's on with the same deal. So that's what I think. This has been it's a super interesting article, and I've heard this one kicked around before, but I've never really done a deep dive. So that is my deep dive. I think that, mandatory gun ownership did have some probably positive impacts. Or is it the impacts that we just look at and go, oh, okay, yep, there it is? No, I don't think so. I think it's more subtle than that. And that's how I think a lot of this crime is. It's more subtle, and we don't have these direct things that we can look at and go, okay, this one caused that one. There we go. But do we need teams like the Gun Violence Protection Team in a city like Portland? Absolutely. Defunding that stuff was not a good call. Not a good call. And now police departments across the United States are scrambling. We need to really get this back in. And it's not the police departments. It's the, city councils and the mayors and the governors going, oh, this isn't a good look. Oh, man. Whew, we got to do something about the gun violence going on here because this is unsustainable. We got how many in 2021? Oh, wow. Not good. That's the narrative right now. Right? We're going to refund the police. All those budget cuts, we are reimagining and rethinking those as we speak. Do you hand out a gun to everybody? It's a household owner? Probably not. But it'd be interesting to see what happened if you did, right? I don't know. Those are my thoughts on this topic. I know they're rambling and they kind of go in and out, but that's what I think. But I don't have any handguns, bottom line. All right. So that's what I've got on mandatory gun ownership in Kennesaw, Georgia in 1982. And looking back on it, this is where we're at. It may or may not have had an impact on the stats. We don't really know. But it's a fun read, right? Yeah, it's a fun read. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I will catch up with you in the next one. And if you guys have stories of other towns that have done something similar, I would love to hear them. Send them to me here on the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. Sean at seattlerealestatepodcast.com. I'm easy to get a hold of. Thanks again for being here. I'll catch up with you in the next one. Until then, stay safe. We'll see you then. Bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.